I wouldn't claim that taxonomy is never useful, but sometimes taxonomies are put in place that really don't reflect the complex relationship and overlap between the parts. And this can be an issue in a professional field like software engineering, where people have a habit of eagerly creating bad taxonomies and trying to overlook where they aren't actually reflecting things well. And it can also come up in how we look at ourselves as human beings in serious and less serious contexts. So I'll ignore the software example because that's an argument that's been done to death. But if you look at a person, you could divide a person into physical, mental, emotional, and social aspects, for example. And a silly example of this would be in role-playing games. People want to model what characters in these games can do, and they often come up with some kind of model like this. And it really is rather silly, because which of these aspects does not have some kind of action that involves more than one of them? And this same problem occurs when it's done in medicine, for example. If you've got a more specific example, let's say you've got horrible skin lesions on your foot or on a child's foot. Do you go to a pediatrician because they're a child? Do you go to a dermatologist because it's their skin? Do you go to a podiatrist because it's their foot? These taxonomies don't actually really reflect the situation, and you've just got to try and muddle through that somehow. But more generally for a person, if you're looking at the, physical, mental, emotional, and social aspects of a person, when is your physical health not going to be influenced by how you think and what your emotional state is? Your emotional state is partially in the body and partially manifesting in the mind. And then the mind can affect what is happening in your emotions and can affect what you do with your body. And all of these mental and physical behaviors and characteristics and your emotional state all affect your ability to influence and cooperate with other people, socially speaking, and how other people socially interact with you will affect what you think mentally. It will affect your emotional state. So all of these things, they overlap, and they don't always overlap in the same way, and they influence each other, but don't always influence each other in the same way. Sometimes it's bidirectional, sometimes it's more one direction than the other, and sometimes it's just an artificial divide, like emotions. Well, emotions are sort of a kind of thinking and a kind of state in your body. And when we get caught up in these taxonomies, we miss the opportunity to notice another aspect. And my pet example, of course, would be the mimetic aspect of a person. So, it doesn't really have a physical aspect to it, but it is a mental thing, but it is also a social thing. It's by its nature the type of mental thing that comes from social interaction. And if you're used to this taxonomy, you wouldn't even know how to fit memetics into it. Think of memetics as a discipline of research, which it absolutely should be. Well, where's it going to fit? It came out of biology, but memes aren't biological. It just so happens that the evolutionary biologists, are the ones that understood evolution the best. It's not that it's particularly in their field. Should you put it under philosophy? Where under philosophy? While we're talking about philosophy, what is the distinction between metaphysics and epistemology? How can you have ethics without looking at these other two disciplines? How can you have epistemology without logic? And so on. These taxonomies all serve us in some way, but they also limit us in big ways, to the point where if you actually get to the ability to think subtly about these things and think about the relationships between them, the taxonomy might actually be holding you back. So that's probably... There's a lot of segues there from one thing into another, but you can see that life and thinking are full of these problematic taxonomies. And I think any thinking person should be aware that this is a very flawed tool for understanding the world.